Let's start with that story. The reaction from...
Good to be back on your show, John.
Fantastic to hear from you. The reaction from the president, Joe Biden, he called it outrageous. The Prime Minister, Netanyahu, called it a complete distortion of reality. Can you share with us, sir, what you believe the reality is and what Israel will do now?
Well, I agree with President Biden that it was outrageous. I'd also say that it was dangerous. Why is it outrageous? Because they're creating a false symmetry between Israel and Hamas, and they're basing it on false charges. As to the false symmetry, I think every fair-minded person realizes how absurd it is that you seek arrest warrants against the heads of a genocidal terror organization and the Prime Minister and Defense Minister of democracy that's fighting against terrorism. But the whole case, John, and you mentioned at the beginning, is based on a false charge that we have a policy of starving the Gazan population. Now, I'm in the war cabinet. We haven't had that policy from day one. So all of the charges are absurd. You're saying Israel's starving the population. We have put in 500,000 tons of humanitarian assistance, mostly food, into Gaza. We have paved roads to allow trucks, 20,000 trucks, to go into Gaza. So at a time when Hamas is actually stealing the humanitarian assistance, attacking the passage points, Israel is doing everything to enable the humanitarian assistance to come in. So all of these charges are baseless. The reason why I think, John, it's dangerous is because what it says to every terror group is that terrorism pays and that you can use human shields. You can attack a country, you can kill its civilians, you can then hide behind your own civilians, embed yourself in civilian areas, hospitals, schools, mosques. You know that's exactly what Hamas does. And the International Criminal Court won't go just after you. They're going to go after Israel, the country that's defending itself. This absurdity actually endangers all democracies who are in this battle against terrorism. And beyond that, I must tell you, I think it will fan the flames of anti-Semitism, because people don't know what a ridiculous joke this whole thing is. So a lot of people will think, hey, the International Criminal Court, they've passed this decision. They're seeking arrest warrants against Israel. It has to be serious, right? It can't be baseless. So there must be something to it. And I think a lot of the anti-Semitism that you're seeing spread around the world, I think it's going to be on turbocharged right now. And that's why this is so dangerous. We were very pleased to hear a strong statement from President Biden, from other world leaders. I think serious countries pretty much don't take this seriously, and I hope that continues.
Minister, in October, the defense minister had this to say, quote, "I have ordered a complete siege on the Gaza Strip. There will be no electricity, no food, no fuel. Everything is closed." Do you think that is evidence of a possible crime, that quote right there from October?
Absolutely not. What month are we in?
Well, this is what your defense minister said, that it was the plan.
Now you're saying the day after, we have 3,000 terrorists cross our border, murder our civilians, rape our women, burn babies. The defense minister goes out and says, we're shutting that down. You know why? Because we had an active war theater in the southern parts of Israel that took several days to actually get a handle of. Since then, what we've done, after the first few days of the war, we have enabled this humanitarian assistance to come into Gaza, 500,000 tons. Do you know that the percentage of water that Israel supplies to Gaza today is higher, actually significantly higher than it was on October 7th? We're the ones that are actually flooding humanitarian assistance into Gaza. Hamas is stealing that assistance and sometimes denying the population. But right now, the population has humanitarian assistance. They have food, they have water, they have medicine. That has been our policy since the beginning, and that's been the policy that the Prime Minister has led. A lot of people in Israel were angry about the policy. You know why? Because we're 250, now about 128 hostages that are still being held in Gaza, and they said, why are we responsible for providing all this humanitarian assistance? And the Prime Minister says we're going to act in accordance to international law, and that is what Israel has done from the beginning of this war. To have a policy of starvation and then to pave roads to allow thousands of trucks to go into Gaza, that makes no sense. It's the same thing when you accuse Israel of a charge of genocide when we're actually fighting a genocidal force. Everything has been flipped on its head. I think not only is it outrageous, it's dangerous. And what they did, it's like bringing Nuremberg trials. Yes, we'll put some Nazis on trial, but, you know, let's have Winston Churchill and let's have FDR on trial, too, for the crimes that they supposedly committed during World War II. This is very dangerous for every democracy. I was glad to see very strong bipartisan opposition in the United States, led by the President of the United States against this. You saw Britain weigh in. You saw Germany weigh in. You saw other countries. And as I said, serious countries do not take these charges serious because they're not. This prosecutor, by the way, was supposed to come to Israel to actually get the facts. He is not interested in the facts. He was interested in defaming Israel, and the defamation of the Jews usually is what leads to physical attacks against the Jews. That's why I'm worried that this is going to lead to the spread of anti-Semitism. And this prosecutor, who frankly is a rogue prosecutor in what he did, he does not have jurisdiction over Israel, and he does not have jurisdiction of any of these cases. That's something that the American State Department and all the European countries have said from the beginning, that he does not have jurisdiction over this issue. The Palestinians are not a state, and Israel, he doesn't have jurisdiction over Israel. But this rogue prosecutor has gone forward. I hope that the court, the ICC, in order to save its own credibility, will not become a kangaroo court and will basically throw these charges out.
Minister, I'd love to talk about the policies going forward when it comes to Gaza and also the West Bank. I believe you still maintain that you're opposed to Palestinian Authority leadership in those areas, as well as you maintain that Israel does not want to reoccupy the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. So what is the plan, sir, for these two areas?
So what the prime minister said actually several months ago is that we don't want Israel to control civilian life within Gaza, and we don't want Hamas to control it. What we first have to do is we have to finish the job of dismantling Hamas's military machine in Gaza, and we're well on our way to doing it. We're operating in Rafah now. We're continuing that operation, and we need to finish that job. Once we finish the job of Hamas and taking out its essentially its army, then we have to work to getting an alternative in there. The truth of the matter is no alternative will come unless they know that Hamas is not going to be there. And what we'd like to see is civilians within Gaza that are not Hamas, that are not beholden to the Palestinian Authority, but Palestinian civilians in Gaza run their own affairs. As for security, Israel is going to have to retain overriding security responsibility because we're going to have to do anti-terror operations for some time to come. Look, we hope we don't have to do it. We hope there can be an alternative and they will go and fix the situation in Gaza. They'll be willing to fight against the terrorists and that Israel doesn't have to do it. But the Palestinian Authority right now is not fighting terrorism in the area it controls. And it's also educating the next generation of Palestinians, not for peace with Israel, but for war with Israel. That's why we don't want to see the PA go there. If the PA would totally change, would show that it's capable of fighting terrorism in the areas it controls, of educating the next generation for peace, that would be a totally different story. Unfortunately, that didn't happen.
Minister, there's a real question here about how you get not only international support, but Israeli support, because a lot of Israelis, an increasing number, are really pushing back and actually do want a plan to understand what's next when we get to another phase. Benny Gantz is saying that he is going to quit the war cabinet by June 8th unless there is a clear and a different war path, and he needs to see a government that will win the people's trust. What's your response? Why is the current government in its capacity not winning the people's trust in Israel?
Well, I frankly don't think that that's true. It might be the case, and I don't want to get into internal Israeli politics, that Mr. Gantz's plan is different than the plan that the prime minister has. There may be people in Israel who believe you should have the Palestinian Authority in Gaza. They may believe that you should create a Palestinian state. I must tell you, about 70–80% of the Israeli public actually reject that. And I think overwhelmingly there is support for the prime minister's policies. There are different views of what the day after should be in Gaza, but he has been very clear. He doesn't want Israel to reoccupy Gaza and to control it, and he doesn't want Hamas to be there. But in order to get to actually the day after, you got to get to the day after. You have to finish the job with Hamas. A lot of people are waiting on the sidelines, and they're looking, is Israel going to finish this? Is Hamas going to be there in the day after? Because we have tried. Actually, several weeks ago, there was an attempt to take local Gazans and to put them in charge of certain areas within Gaza. Guess what happened? They were killed and they were threatened. And therefore, no one wants to step forward unless they know for sure that Hamas is not going to be there. That's why it's so important for Israel to finish the operation, the military operation in Rafah, so we can move on to the next stage and not only win the war, but then talk about achieving peace.
Minister, just finally, I'd love a conversation, just an update on the current talks around the ceasefire for hostages. Where are we? Are those talks ongoing or have they completely collapsed?
Well, I don't know if I would say that they've completely collapsed. What happened is Hamas agreed to its own proposal. It's very interesting, John. They basically took a document and they said, we agree to what we're going to put on the table. But that document would effectively mean that it would be the end of the war. They could rebuild themselves militarily, retake control of Gaza, and essentially perpetrate, as they promised to do, October 7th attacks again and again and again. And no Israeli government is going to agree to it. We put an offer on the table several weeks ago. The Secretary of State, Tony Blinken, described it as a very generous offer. That offer still stands. I don't know if Hamas will take it. If they don't take it, we will continue our operations. We're always going to be prepared to stop at any point. and get our hostages out. And frankly, if Hamas tomorrow would surrender, would disarm, would give us our hostages, the war would be over. We have no desire to send our sons and daughters to fight in Gaza. But the problem is we have a terror organization there that is committed to our destruction and that is holding our hostages. So we will continue to prosecute this war until we win the war. And hopefully we will, in winning the war, as I see it, it's not just defeating Hamas militarily, ending its political rule in Gaza, ensuring that Gaza doesn't pose a threat to Israel. It's also bringing all our hostages home. We're committed to doing that.
Minister, I understand this is very, very sensitive given the families that are involved. What update do you have on the fate of some of these hostages? Are you aware if they're still alive, if they're healthy? What kind of communication have you received?
I think we have some pretty good intelligence about that. Unfortunately, John, not all of them are alive. I don't want to get into the specific numbers. We actually had an operation a few days ago where we were able to return 4 bodies to their families. And of course, that brings, as hard as it is when they were dead, but we brought peace and comfort, and they can close a chapter for those families and to be buried in Israel. We continue to do those things. We hope that we can bring our hostages out alive, as many as possible, as soon as possible. But it's a very, very difficult situation because they're kept deep underground, a lot of these hostages in the dungeons of Gaza, in these tunnels. A lot of the leaders of Hamas surround themselves with these hostages and use them as human shields. And that's why I think, again, why the prosecutor made such an outlandish, outrageous decision and why he is so bad for the overall battle against terror. Free societies everywhere. There should be a clear line between right and wrong and good and evil. There shouldn't be any comparison whatsoever between Israel and Hamas. And I don't think there should be false allegations that are really libels against Israel for a policy that never happened. No policy of starvation. It did not happen, and it will not happen. We are committed to abide fully by international law.